So many people following my channel have asked me questions about the writing process. As you know, I am starting my own book, and I actually recently lost all my progress. I'm back up to about 20 pages. But just because I'm that far into writing a book does not mean I know how to answer almost any of the questions asked of me, because I have no idea what I'm doing. Now, I've decided to enlist the help of a friend of mine who has actually written and self-published a book, Elliot Brooks. I'm sure many of you have heard her talk. I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about her on my channel before because we're friends and we've helped promote each other before. If you have not checked out her book, Peace and Turmoil, I was doing so well for a minute there. If you have not checked out her book, Peace and Turmoil, highly recommend you do. I'm currently about 9 chapters in and loving it. Elliot, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Thank you for having me. Congrats on
No problem.
20K.
Thanks. Yeah, I just passed 20K. There'll be a live stream today, but for these people yesterday about it. So hopefully that goes well. And Elliot has agreed to do is ask a lot of the questions that people have asked of me that I cannot answer, because she has done it. She's achieved what countless people who have tried writing books have failed to do, and that is get it out there and actually finish, because it's one heck of a commitment. And I've sent her the questions, and I will go ahead and start off by reading the first one, which I feel like is probably the most common question asked of authors, but is like legitimately, it probably has like the most inconsistent answer depending on the book. But that is, how long did the entire writing process from conception to the final edit take?
Yeah, I don't know if I can really contribute to making that more consistent either. It was a very long time for me. And when I started it, I was in college. That's when I started putting the idea into paper, if you will. And it was really bad at first. It was just me getting the ideas out and then scrapping it and then starting over a lot of times. And I didn't have a lot of time in college. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through school. So I just got to it when I could. It wasn't something I was doing on a consistent basis. But once I finished college, I got the first draft done. I would say within a year and a half to 2 years after I graduated college. And then from there, it's just been reworking it, constantly trying to make sure it's better. And then after that is when it went into the professional edit and all of that stuff, getting other people's opinions and insight. So I can't really give an exact amount of time on that one, unfortunately, but it took some time. It took years, we'll say.
Years, wow. So it sounds like, honestly, though, almost an equal amount of chunk of time for writing was the conceptualization. Do you think that's accurate to say?
Yeah. So because so much of what I initially put down wasn't actually in the final product, it did take a long time for me to really figure out the story. I was not one of those people that was extremely prepared and researched all about writing before I started writing. I just had these ideas that I wanted to get out, and it wasn't necessarily something that I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to publish this someday. It was just me getting the ideas down, and then when I had the time to be really serious about it is when I got serious about figuring out the craft of writing and figuring out publishing and marketing and all those things. So I suppose in some ways the conceptualization took a while because it was bad. It was very bad. I have no problem admitting it was terrible at first.
Well, this is kind of connected to one of my later questions I have written down here, but how different is your final idea and story compared to when you first thought of it? And do you think it's healthy to kind of let it breathe and change? Or do you think there's kind of like a core idea that you should hang on to as an author?
I think it's okay if it fluctuates. I think for some people, they have a vision of what they want for an entire series. And if they let that slip because of outside input, so they see reviews or fan theories or something, and then they change stuff, I think that's probably not the healthiest. But the person that you are when you start a story is not the same person you are as you write it. And since the process takes so long, you might realize that there are certain things that aren't really going to work, or that might not actually be how the characters would behave. Something that you had planned for them might not actually fit with them at all. It depends too on the kind of writer you are, I think. Some writers are very planning oriented, and so they plot everything out. I think you said you are yourself, right? You've been plotting a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so for people that do that, I don't know how much they change their story. And then there are people who just sit down and start writing and they feel that it's the most organic way you can do it and it's going to be the most realistic. And I fall kind of in the middle, so I allow some breathing room, but I also have a plan of where it's going. So I always kind of knew where I wanted the book to end, and I knew the characters and their backstories, but I didn't have every single scene mapped out in my mind. So there's a lot of, from getting from point A to point B, there was still that direction, but how we got there might have changed along the way.
Interesting. Okay. And this is kind of just a random follow-up question, but do you think writing another book now, you'll be able to do it much faster, or you want to still take, so yes, a lot faster?
A lot faster,
Okay.
because all that time of me not knowing at all what I was doing before, hopefully I have learned and gotten past that. I've actually written quite a bit of the second book already. So, and I have a lot of the third one figured out as well. So the second book, to give people an idea, a lot of times when authors give you an idea of how much they've written, they say word count instead of page count, because page count is completely dependent on the size of the font and that kind of thing. So the first book is right around 160,000 words at completion, and the second book, there is 60,000 words written. I have a tendency to overwrite, so I'm sure a lot of it will get cut. But a lot of book 2 is already done, and it got done in a much shorter amount of time than book 1 did.
Okay. So when you first write, you're kind of on those Stephen King vibes of overwriting quite a bit, and you chop it down, be a bit more concise.
I am for sure. Yes.
Okay.
And I think I've already started to see and get better at identifying that. I know a lot of people say don't edit as you go, but I do. And so if I start to notice, oh shoot, I'm doing that thing again where the sentences have 3 different clauses and a bunch of them in a row or something, and then I can kind of cut. And that's all thanks to, I always try to give people credit that deserve credit, and that's all to my editor, Molly. She has her own channel, and she's an editor, professional editor, and she has a playlist called Editor Talk. It's extremely helpful for anybody that is looking for insight. And she was so great at telling me and pinpointing, oh, here's a opportunity where you can vary the sentence structure and it will fit the feeling or the mood or the intensity of what's happening. And she was really good at pointing that out. And so when I went back through to edit the entire book, it was a lot of going through and changing sentence structure, which is a good way to cut a lot of words.
Okay. I guess, so you think you'll eventually get to that pace where you're putting out a book a year like Brandon, or multiple books a year, or that's a whole other level?
Well, it depends. It's not currently my full-time job. I am hoping to have the second book out by the end of next year. So okay. It seems like 1 calendar year, but really it's almost 2 years because, you know, it's the first part of this year and then toward the end of next year. So that's the plan. I would love to get 1 book out a year, at least for the first 3 if I can. We'll see. I am curious now. I know you're asking me questions, but I want to ask you, sure. Do you think that you overwrite or that you don't write enough?
I honestly, I'm so not far into it. I don't know the answer to that. So far, I think I'm rushing through certain scenes to get to other scenes, and I have to go back and more flush them out. And because I realized, like, oh, I went through like a lot really quick, and I could probably go back and make this for pacing's sake, not just like the equivalent of a boulder rolling down a hill. I'm trying to, actually make it have the ebb and flow of a typical 3-act structure, as opposed to just, oh, I want to get to this cool scene. Oh, I want to get to that cool scene. So that's my biggest issue right now, I feel like.
Yeah. Do you think that right now that you are rushing through those scenes, not that you are, but you feel that you are because you want to get to the good stuff, or that you just feel you don't know quite yet what details to include?
Definitely the latter there. I don't know what exactly the filler in between these two needs. So let's just get a loose little scaffolding in place. So while this idea is in my head, I can do this next big scene, and then I'll connect the next scene with some loose scaffolding and come back and actually build it out.
I think a big part of the writing process too is figuring out your tendencies and what works best for you. And it sounds like you're already identifying that, which is really good. I know sometimes I'll have a part where I know I need more detail, and I'll just put in parentheses, put in description here or something, or, elaborate on characters' feelings or something, and I just move on because I just did that part. And I feel kind of bad because I have a couple people who really, really loved the first book. They were beta readers. And I have that first chunk of the second book written. And I asked a couple of them if they were interested, if they wanted to read it. And they did. And I just feel bad because I forgot that there was a couple times that I just had random stuff highlighted. And I put something like, come up with a better synonym or something. So I feel kind of bad because that's still in there. But that's okay. They enjoyed it. I think I told them this is very much first draft and it's not polished at all. Or sometimes, so I forgot how to spell this guy's name. If it's a really minor character or something, really minor that's mentioned. So I put that kind of stuff in. I'm not George R. R. Martin. I think he's said in interviews that he can remember everything about every character he's ever written. And I have characters where I'm like, did I put one L or two L's in their name? So I don't want to be inconsistent. I just highlight it and I'm like, I'll find it later.
It makes me feel so much better hearing you say that, because like already I only have like 20 characters realized at all, and I'm already forgetting, like, does he hate him or does he love him? I don't. What? I need to remember what I even set up here, and I'll like consult my notes. So that's nice to hear that. So moving on to the next question I have here, which I know is something you're passionate about, and there's a lot of people on the internet who have a lot of different opinions about this, and that is, why self-publish? You went the self-publishing route. And I know there's people who are diehard that way, and there's people who are diehard the other way. And I'd love to get to your 2 cents weighing the scales a little bit more towards the self-publishing way.
I initially did not want to self-publish, and that was in part because I had the stereotype of self-publishing is for people who can't get traditionally publishing. I feel awful saying that and a bit elitist, but that was my mindset. Initially, I thought it was just what people did for fan fiction or just something they wanted to get out there, which is very incorrect. It's not true. And going through and looking at the pros and cons of both, I realized pretty quickly that it actually was much more in alignment with what I wanted for myself with self-publishing because of the freedoms that come with it. And that's not to say that traditional publishing, that you don't have freedom. It's very much dependent on the contract. And most of the time, the publisher wants a healthy, good relationship with the author. But at the end of the day, it is still a business. And there are people with a lot of expertise that are involved in that process besides just the author. And sometimes, because they have so much expertise and experience, their opinion might outweigh what the author wants. Something as simple as the cover. If they know there's a cover that is going to attract people's attention and it's currently kind of trendy to have that cover design or something along those lines, then the author might not get the final say in that. And that's something simple, but even not having that control really, the idea of not having that control really bothers me.
Because it's your baby.
What was that?
Because it's like your baby. You made this thing. You want to,
Yeah, and I've said before too, I would rather if something went wrong with my book or if something turned out not the best it could possibly be, I weirdly would rather that be my own fault rather than because I couldn't stop someone else from doing it, if that makes sense. I would rather have it be on my shoulders because it's something I've done instead of somebody else behind the scenes because something they did and I don't have control over that. That bothers me. And that's not to say for anybody that is wanting to do traditional publishing that there are for sure horror stories out there, but that's not to say that's the norm. But I don't want to ever have the possibility of being the exception. And one of my favorite authors, his name is Judson Roberts. He wrote the Strongbow Saga. It's a series about Vikings, and I loved it. And I remember when the fourth book was supposed to come out, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and I would never see it in the bookstores. And I went online and I saw that he had some problems with his publisher where they didn't want to release the fourth book of his series because the first three didn't make them what they felt was enough money. But rather than allowing him to publish it himself, because that would potentially give them competition, they just held on to it until the books were no longer in bookstores. And pretty much everybody forgot about him. And then when his contract was up, he was able to publish again. But at that point, nobody really knew about his books or cared about them anymore. And so whenever I do any kind of video about underhyped books or anything like that, I always try to mention his books because I think they're great, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy them. And I think it's a shame that happened. He's not the only person that's happened to. There are a lot of authors who they actually have other works. V.E. Schwab, for example, she's had some issues in the past with publishers. And again, it's not the norm, but
right.
I hate that possibility. I'm not trying to scare anybody. Definitely look into both and see the pros and cons. But that was the biggest reason for me why I wanted to do self-publishing.
Well, if, let's say, someone like Tor Publishing, a huge name, did come forward and want to work with you, would you consider working with a publisher now that your series is out there and maybe you have a little bit more control because you have the first entry under your belt? Or is it still just you'd rather finish this series on your own?
It would very much depend on what they were willing to let me have control over. And for example, Jay, Jay from Capture Wars, who did the cover and the formatting, I love how he did the cover. He's a pleasure to work with, and I would want him to continue doing the covers. I wouldn't want to have somebody do the covers just because Tor has the people that they hire to do covers. Even though their covers often are beautiful and fantastic, Jay is so much a part of what I think of when I think of my book's cover because he did a great job with it, and I would want to ensure that he still has the opportunity. And same with my editor. If she wasn't allowed to be my editor anymore, that would be unfortunate. I work well with her. She is fantastic at telling me exactly what the book needs and in a way that's nice. And I just really, really enjoyed working with her. I would hate that I wouldn't get those possible people working alongside me again. And so if they were perfectly willing to let me have all these people involved still, and they basically said, hey, we'll just take care of all the distribution stuff for you. And then we'll also maybe take care of doing it in different languages and things like that. I'd be like, okay, that sounds good. But if I had to give up the colleagues, if you will, that I've had with this first book, then I wouldn't want to do it because they deserve too much of the credit. And I wouldn't want to abandon them just because a publisher reached out.
Okay. It's fair enough response. And, there are multiple sides to this. I've never really looked into the self-publishing or getting a publisher involved routes. So basically all I've heard is from your side of it, but you make a very convincing argument to say the least. But this is following up with just another kind of off-topic question I get a lot. People are constantly telling me that they want to write a book, but they hate the writing process, and they want to know, does it get better? Do you start enjoying writing? So I guess transforming that question to a question for you: do you enjoy writing? Have you always enjoyed writing? Has your love of it grown? What's that like?
I very much enjoy it. It can be demanding at times or frustrating, but I very much like it. I like being able to see something that's in my head come to life and in a way that other people can experience it as well. I think it's so much fun. I don't know that there's too much about the writing process I don't enjoy. So I think it does get better the further into it you get, because sometimes you can feel kind of lost, or you feel like you've put out a really amazing scene and then you realize that scene doesn't need to happen and it's not necessary. And then you think, oh, I just wasted all this time and I don't want to scrap this. Can I make it fit? Is there a way I can put this in? And the best thing to do when that happens is just delete it, and you feel awful. And then you feel like you just wasted so much. And for me, that's one of the worst parts. But I enjoy it very much. I think it's a lot of fun.
That actually, you said something there that one of the few pieces of advice I've gotten from a scriptwriter I've been talking to and a couple of people I know who are writing is never delete anything you write. Do you actually delete things you write, or do you more, by delete, do you mean you more just like put to the side?
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified. I definitely don't just flat out delete it completely. I'll usually highlight it, put it in a different document, and then save it and say scene with this character or possible scene with this character. And then I put it off to the side. And then almost always I know, oh, that does need to come out. I don't know that I've ever written a scene, thought, I don't think this needs to be here, and then decided, oh, yeah, sure it does. I don't think that's ever happened. But again, I'm an overwriter. So I tend to write too much and then need to take it away. And if somebody has the opposite, then for them, maybe they scrapped it because they were having a day where they thought everything they wrote was bad. And that's very different from looking at something as objectively as possible and realizing this doesn't need to be here and then taking it out. Even just a character, if you realize this character doesn't need to exist, or this character isn't that important, and it's awful because you feel like you've poured time into this make-believe person, they feel real to you. But usually for me, it's what's best to just realize that doesn't need to be here.
That's okay. Fair enough. That's pretty much lines up what I believe as well. There's something therapeutic in my mind when you really hate something you wrote, just deleting it. I've been yelled at for doing that, but there have been times where it's like, I hate it, gone, never coming back. It doesn't exist anymore. But okay, so switching to a kind of more fun question. I've been asked this one and I've answered it, but I actually just really want to know what you would say. If you could not write fantasy anymore, you had to pick another genre, which genre would you go to?
I have another genre in mind another story, I should say, that I want to write at some point, and it is a different genre, and I guess it could be considered science fiction. It's not really, it's futuristic a little bit, but it's in our own world. There isn't magic or anything. It's just kind of the story Why the Last Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of like that, where the setup for the story is very unrealistic, if you will, but it's kind of a what if the world looked like this situation. So along those lines, it's not, I guess you could consider Why the Last Man science fiction, sort of.
Minimalist science fiction / science fiction dystopian are really hot right now, and I believe that's where Why the Last Man fits in.
Okay, I wasn't sure what category that would fall under, but similar to that, because that story, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's a really interesting premise. I haven't read it. I've heard it's a lot of fun though.
I read the first one ages and ages and ages ago, and it was really well done for an odd premise. Usually, like in writing, it's a great premise, okay done. This was a odd premise, extraordinarily well done. So yeah, I recommend as well people pick that up. But so that's interesting. There's a whole other conversation that we had about the current state of sci-fi, because it's so scattered and subgenre and mutated and strange and just blurred lines everywhere. But I kind of think that's a great thing, because I think you and I have talked about this before. I don't believe in hard lines for genre. I think genre should just be a loose kind of mold that you can change in whatever fits the story you want to tell. So I kind of like the fact that sci-fi is so weird. I'm saying odd too much. It's weird right now. But yeah, so sci-fi, I'm happy to hear that, because I'm as you know, huge sci-fi nerd. So this is one that I get asked all the time, and I'm still too early on to answer with any kind of informed way. What was the hardest part of the writing process?
That's pretty tricky for me to answer as well, because you sent me these questions earlier and I was thinking through and I am the kind of person that I usually, when I set my mind to something, I very much commit to it, regardless of how time consuming or tiring it is. And I know there are going to be times that it's difficult, but I just figure that's part of the whole process. So identifying a specific thing that I found to be the hardest part, I don't know if I have a concrete answer. There are definitely a few things that were challenging. I find that discovering or identifying your voice in writing can be difficult. And a specific example would be in the story that you are currently writing, that might have a different voice maybe than what you want for a different story idea you have. And figuring out what you want your voice to be like can be really challenging, I think, especially when you have days where you think everything you write is bad and you pick up a book that has a very different style than yours and you think, oh, see, this is why mine is bad. I should have done it like this. Because Andrzej Sapkowski, for example, in the Witcher series, has a very, very different writing style than most fantasy I've read. It's so heavy on the dialogue and the monologues, and a lot of times it's not really a deep point of view, third person deep, because you're not really with the character. A lot of scenes start off with some random non-playable character kind of witnessing our main characters. And so often you'll see that in his writing, that if I were working on my book and editing my book and I see something like that and it's so different from mine, then I think, should I have done something like that? And then I question my own ways. So I think feeling confident in what you're doing or the effort that you have to pursue a specific voice, I think that can be really challenging, especially because most of the time when you're writing, you will succumb to self-doubt and think everything is trash. So I think that's the hardest part for me.
Okay. Well, that bleeds in really nicely to my next question. Did you almost ever quit? And if so, what kept you going?
No. I never almost quit. I asked Sean, my husband, I was like, do you remember me ever having a moment where I thought I shouldn't be doing it? And he's like, no. So I really, when I want to do something, I feel like if anything, he has to almost hold me back, not to get into, me and my husband, but sometimes I'll be like, I want to do this and this and this. And I get all these ideas and he kind of has to be like, are you sure? This sounds like a lot of work. And I'm like, I'm the one that's going to do the work though. So it's okay. But I didn't. I know it's not helpful to people. But I think a lot of times people want to quit because they don't feel good about what they're writing. They don't feel like their story is worth being told, or they see another story that's kind of similar to their own and that story's told really well, and then all of a sudden they think, what's the point of mine? What am I contributing? It's not even unique. There's so many things that people feel are reasons to quit, and I ultimately think that everybody's story is going to be different if they make an effort to not write fan fiction. Basically, if you have a story idea in mind and you really research what are typical tropes and cliches, and not even tropes, but cliches. For example, I feel really bad saying this, so sorry if anybody's done this, because I did it initially, so I don't mind admitting it. If you start your book off with a flashback sequence or somebody waking up from a dream or in a dream and then they wake up or they look in the mirror to describe their appearance at the beginning, if you start the book off in any of those ways, then yeah, you're going to lack a little originality, but a little bit of research will fix that. But if you really are dedicated to writing this story idea that you have, and you're going to have different experiences than anybody else, so that story is going to reflect and mirror that. So I don't think anybody should ever feel so doubtful that they're not original enough that they quit. I would hope nobody does that. I'm sure people do though, and that's sad. What about you? Have you ever thought, I should just stop? I know you're really pretty early on, but are you already experiencing that?
No, my entire mindset right now is this needs to be done, and I'm going to get it done one way or the other, unless like someone hits me with their car. So I'm pretty determined. My only real internal debate is what's the pace I should set for myself, because you and I are in a similar vein where we're working jobs in YouTube and all these other side projects, and I'm trying to just allocating time. It's the biggest challenge I'm facing. So right now, currently, my writing schedule is very much so just like, I won't write for 4 days, and then I'll write for like 3 hours one day, and then I won't write for 4 days. And I know that's not probably the best schedule, but it's what I can manage. So that's I'm not going to quit. I'm going to do it. It's just a matter of, will I get it done when I'm 30, or will I get it done when I'm 40? That's the problem.
Do you mind if I hop on that really quick? I know you didn't
Sure.
ask the question, but I know that sometimes people will see online the amount of time that they should be writing if they're actually serious, or they'll hear people say, oh, if you really care, you'll dedicate this much time. They'll hear things like that, and then they will think, well, I don't have that much time, so I guess I can't do it. And there's a difference between you have other obligations and you just don't want to dedicate the time. And if you're the kind of person that has obligations, you have a job or school or kids or things that come first, don't feel bad if you can't fit that mold. I know, I think in one of Sanderson's lectures, he said something about, if you can, you should try to do 6 hours a week. And for some people, they can't even find a half an hour to do something at all. So I think that isn't going to work for everybody, and that's okay. And to just, when you're first starting, that it's okay if, like you were saying, you only have maybe on one of your weekends 3 hours or something. I think that that's okay. I don't think that a specific time increment determines how much you care. Unless, like I said, you're like, oh, I just want to watch Netflix, though. That's a little different.
Yeah. Well, I find it, going off on a tangent here, it's pretty interesting to me how, like, every other artistic process I've seen, whether it's painting or singing or directing, everyone seems to be open the idea of, like, yeah, however it works for you, just do it that way. But it seems like authors are all very opinionated that, like, you need to do it this way. Like Hemingway wrote like 10 hours a day or something like that. Like he would burn through multiple pencils or pens before he'd stop. And like, it's like, oh, you have to hold yourself to that standard. You're not Hemingway. Like that's the thing. You can't hold yourself to prodigies. You need to find what works for you. And, you know, down the road, you can tell people, well, you know, I was able to crank out this whole book only working 3 hours a weekend. Like that's, you know, everyone in hindsight looks really good. But if Hemingway had been writing 10 hours a day and never succeeded, people will just say, what an idiot who spent so much time writing on something that didn't work out for him. It's about finding whatever works out for you, I feel like.
I think that's very true. I'm a very obsessive person. When I decide to sit down and work on something, I work on it for hours. And with writing, a lot of times if I set a goal and I decide I'm going to write this much, then I will stay up pretty much all night and just be writing for hours and hours, to the point where when I finally look away from the screen, I like can't see quite right. Do you remember when I messaged you and I said, what do I do? I've been staring at the screen pretty much nonstop all week and I have such a headache because you work with computers. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do very clearly.
What are your settings with the brightness? And I'm like, I don't know. But anyway, no, I think that's very true. And I went to school for music education. So you're talking about in other art forms, the amount that people insist, oh, you know, do whatever works for you. But when it's in a school setting, you definitely, you have to practice. You have to practice. And I mentioned earlier that I worked my way through school. So I had multiple jobs and very little time. And a lot of times I like wouldn't eat all day. And I would go from classes to practicing to teaching to a different job to coming home and studying and then wake up and do it all again. And it was really exhausting. And I would go to my lessons and my professor would be like, you should at least do an hour of scales and arpeggios a day. And I'm like, okay. And I would be so burnt out all the time because I would try really hard to fulfill and that was my degree. So it's not like I could not care about that stuff. It wasn't quite the same, but it was very difficult to find that time with everything else that I had going on and trying to still maintain good grades too, not just passing, but I wanted to do well and at least somewhat excel in my academics. So now when you have more freedom, because I was definitely busier in college than I am now, when I have more freedom, I have to find that kind of ritual that I had when I was in college and sit down and tell myself, okay, I have to do this. And then it kind of is a reflection of what it was like when in college I had to go to the practice room and say, okay, I'm going to be here for the next 3 or 4 hours and just crank stuff out and be productive. And something that I think is similar. Sorry, you didn't really ask this question, but
you're fine.
Something, hopefully somebody can draw parallels to other creative outlets they have. But something I found very similar about music and writing is that you will have some results by the end, but it is so slow. And I like to get things done. When we decided we were going to paint our kitchen before we got our puppy, I was like, we're going to get this done in one day. And we did, but it took the whole day. I don't just kind of dilly-dally until things get done. But you can't do that with a lot of creative things. You have to come back and do it again, and then you have to come back and do it again. And I think that's very true of writing, and that's okay. If you don't have the time to sit and write a whole book in 3 months, that's fine. Just keep at it. Just try to be consistent with what you can do, and you will get it done. Like you said, someday you can tell your nephews and nieces, because you don't want kids, you can tell them like, oh your uncle wrote this whole book by writing 3 hours every 4 days.
Yeah. And it's funny, like so much what you just said comes down to boiling it down. Like it's just about work ethic and time regiment, which a lot of people do struggle with. Like regimenting time is difficult. And that's what's holding me back right now. I'm typically someone who's very scheduled out. But having that work ethic, having that mentality of just get it done, I feel like if anything else is one of the most crucial elements of starting a book, at least from my very early on standpoint, is if it's not about intelligence, which I hear people say all the time. I don't think they're smart enough to write a book. It's not about XYZ. It's about putting in the time, effort, and work.
Can I ask you something? So
Sure.
I'm the kind of person that I start to feel guilty if I dedicate time to one thing and not the other.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that with you trying to start writing, I know that you're pretty dedicated to trying to be physically active. Do you find you feel bad when you're at the gym because you think, oh shoot, I haven't written in a few days, I should be right? Do you ever have those kinds of thoughts?
It's funny you asked that. I have like cut my gym time in half since I've started working out because I've just been like, something needs to go. It's going to be that. And I've also started incorporating like my current gym time is where I'm kind of just going, like thinking through everything I've written. Like I usually listen to audiobooks at the gym, but I've kind of cut that out. And I've started just going over in my head what I've written and what I want to write next and how to connect the certain scenes that I've written more effectively. So it's more just like, okay, how much do I want to stay in shape versus how much do I want to get this done? And so it kind of just balanced out to like, well, I'm going to get done on the treadmill. I'm not going to do any lifting. And instead I'm going to come sit my sweaty butt in this chair and I'm going to write for that time that I would have spent lifting. I also just love cardio more than anything else. So like I kind of use as an excuse to cut out any kind of thing I don't like from the gym. So, you know.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I have my book done, so I guess I can't lift today.
Oh, darn it. Also, I just found like a more effective fast workout. There's a place right near me that's indoor climbing, and that's like the greatest most fun workout I've ever done. I'm absolutely in love with it, and it kills my back and shoulders, which I need to work on the most. So it's like, yeah, there you go. Just get that done really quick. Come home, be sweaty, right?
That's quite admirable of you that you're still finding the time to do that. Because not because I don't want to be it's not quite the same as I don't like being active. I'm just gonna say I can't. It's not quite that level, but usually things that involve my health are the first to go out the window, like eating, sleep, being active. And so there'll be days that I wake up and I look in the mirror, I'm like, wow, I need to go for a walk. Because it's just, I'm clear, my eyes are tired from staring at screens or paper or something for so long, and I'm hungry. So I will have days, I'll come home and I usually wake up and eat a granola bar or something, but then I'll come home at 5, 6, 7. My schedule is always different from teaching. I'll come home and I'll be like, wow, I haven't eaten anything all day except for that granola bar this morning. And I'm like, whoops. Because I get too caught up trying to do the YouTube stuff and then trying to market a little bit and then trying to answer people's comments. And I don't have kids. I don't know how people have children. You and I both are the same. We don't want kids. I have my puppy, Luna, who I love very much. She's very time consuming, but she's the best. And I don't know how people function with children.
I'm struggling with a cat. I don't get it. Like Pips was like on coke earlier, and now he crashed and he's to sleep on my bed. It's like living with a drug addict. I don't even want to know what it's like living with kids because this is just next level.
This is slight side tangent. Sorry for people that are like, get back to the writing stuff. But Luna today, she tried to eat a bee, and then she's like, and she spit it out. And then she came inside and started like kind of angling her mouth funny. And I was like, oh no, she got stung. And then I felt really bad for her, and she went curled up on her blankie and just looked sad. I felt that's what happens when you have puppies. Meanwhile, kids like bang their heads against the wall, and parents have to worry about, oh my gosh, is my kid gonna die? That's not really what I have with Luna very much at all.
Dogs and cats are fairly self-sufficient. It's like cats are the most self-sufficient, dogs, and then kids. It's just like, are you breathing? Okay, we got that one going.
I will say, is very needy. Oh my gosh, it's so sad because she's very attached to me, very attached to me. And so when I leave to go teach, she cries so much. And it's not, I can't even describe how sad it is. It's very frantic. Like she's very nervous and sad all of a sudden. And then she starts howling and I'll be in the garage and I can hear her. And I'm like, ah. And they always tell you're not supposed to get them worked up by saying, oh, I'll be back, I promise, don't worry, mommy will be home. You're not supposed to do that because the high pitches and they don't know what you're saying. All that is just going to make them more anxious. So I have to very cold-heartedly just walk away from her as she's crying and I feel like a monster. Does Pips care to leave? Is he like, whatever, man, see ya, bring me more?
I think he knows my schedule, so when I leave in the morning, he's just like, whatever. But every day when I get home, he gives me this vibe of like, I thought you were dead. And he's just like the most cuddly thing. And then 5 minutes into that, he just starts gnawing on me in like a playful way. And then he gnaws too hard. And then I start working on YouTube and stuff, and I'll play with him a little bit. And then he just like, the biggest issue of me getting videos up is the fact that while I'm editing, Pips is just like right here, like trying to get me to pay attention to him.
There's so many mornings. I usually try to get everything ready really early in the morning. And Luna usually naps in the morning. It's like I'm talking about my child. She's taking her nap to get work done. But she'll wake up and then I try to take her out immediately. She's a little puppy and her bladder's not that strong, and I'll bring her back inside. But then she like wants water, or she wants a treat, or she wants to play, and she'll be like, "Ow, wow!" She makes a noise at me, and I'll be like, "No, I can't right now. I'm almost done. Okay, like 10 more." Like she can understand, and then she'll start barking, and I'm like, "Gosh darn it!" Because you're not supposed to really pay attention to their barks. I'm not a dog expert, so people feel free to correct me. But from everything I've read, you're not supposed to be like, "Hush, no, stop," and you're not supposed to bark back at them or anything, because then it gives them the attention, and then they want to do that every time. So she'll bark and I do this. I cross my arms and I look away, and then she'll like, and then she'll like like she gets frustrated and lays down, and then I can go back to working. And sometimes she'll fall back asleep, or sometimes she'll keep doing it. I'll be like, gosh darn it. Then I have to wait a couple minutes until she's not making the noise. Then I'll go get her something. I'll play with her a little. It makes it sound like I neglect her. I don't. I promise. I'm with my dog more than the average person is with their dog. I'm with her most of the day because I leave to teach in the evenings. But when I'm trying to get stuff done, it's the same thing as with Pips. It's like, okay, just little puppy, give me 5 minutes. I swear I'm almost done.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I appreciate you answering all my questions. Thank you so much. I feel like ending with pet talk was the best way to go. It was like a lot of dense, like, okay, how do you write? And then it's just, and also adorableness still exists in the world. So I was happy with that. All right.
Yeah, I'll have to
I hope
insert pictures of our animals.
I think I have a few pictures of Luna, so I'll go ahead and throw them up, or feel free to send me your favorites.
Oh, I'll send
and I have plenty of pictures of Pips.
Okay. Well, is there anything you want to say? Because I know you said you don't feel qualified to answer any questions, but you definitely have opinions and experience already. So I think that's still helpful. Is there anything you want to, any words of wisdom for anybody?
I have like extreme prejudice against ill-informed opinions. And so I don't want to be the guy who, like, after writing 20 pages is like, I'm an author. Like, I just hit 20K subs and I still don't want to call myself a YouTuber because I don't feel like it yet. So what I will say is the only one I have like a strong opinion on is the most frustrating part of the writing process, me, is staying organized. That to me is just insanity. So I've started using that service. That was actually a sponsor for me at one time, and I've enjoyed them. But actually, I think that was the one question I didn't ask you that I had on my list. How do you stay organized?
I mentioned to you privately before, so this isn't very interesting for you, but for the most part, I keep a lot of different little files in my computer. And then the program Scrivener has this bulletin board feature that you can write a title and then some information in little note cards. And then you can rearrange them very easily. And like a regular bulletin board, it's just digital. But I really like that function because it helps me see, since my story is multiple point of view, oh, I've been away from this character for way too long. I need to, that kind of thing. Timeline, it helps you see timeline and everything. But even though we joked earlier about how I'll forget the spelling of a character's name or something, I usually remember events pretty well. And I remember most of the characters' feelings towards things or their reactions. So I would say I don't have to take extensive notes, but when I am wanting to start something new or do a very, very basic outline, I'll start off by writing it on paper. I think that is really helpful for me. Then I'll go from paper to kind of doing an outline either in Scrivener or on Microsoft Word or something. And then from there, I'll just start writing. It is a little more challenging with multiple point of view than it is with if it's one in some ways. There's pros and there's difficulties about both, but I think that can be pretty tricky when you have multiple characters and you have to keep track of what was the last time we saw this person? Does that need to be moved over here, or those kinds of things? How do you organize? You said you use that one service.
Yeah, Campfire sponsored one of my videos, and the only reason I let them sponsor me is because I was like, this is actually really legit, so I'm okay letting them be a sponsor. And it's really a wonderful service. Before that, I use Google Docs because I find the Google Suite to be one of the best free available suites out there. And it was kind of like I had an Excel spreadsheet of character names, traits, like I had it in Excel, and then I had actual writing in their documents, and then I had like a slideshow thing where I was just kind of keeping track of like, all right, so I used their slideshow for the plot points. I used documents for actual writing and scenes, and then I had Excel to just try to remember who everyone was. It was not pretty, and it was a little crazy. So I'm very happy that I've been able to migrate over to another service. I'm sure like there's more market research could be done on my part to try to find like the best one, but I just happened to find one that I was like, this is great. Let's just go with that.
I want to try that. Campfire. That's what you said it's called?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have any kind of fancy spelling where they slightly changed it to be witty?
Nope. Just go to the link in the description on my video and bam. Not on. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said that sounds good. I'll look for it because that sounds really helpful.
Yeah, and also they let you customize backgrounds, so you're not just staring at white all the time, which is like a little thing that goes a long way when I've been staring at screens all day. Because any application that does not have a night mode drives me absolutely bonkers. If you force me to look at a white background, like the YouTube Creator Studio forces a white background, and so I immediately just like crank my like brightness down to like a 0 because I just can't handle it.
Yeah, I don't ever. I feel like I rarely adjust the lighting on my computer. That's probably a problem.
I completely off topic, going just out of the rails here. I spoke to an optometrist recently about my eyes, and I was like, so, I'm a software engineer full time. I'm staring at screens. I'm editing videos. I pretty much spend like 8 hours a day staring at a screen. What should I do to help my eyes? And she's like, oh, are you night shifting or anything? Yeah, nothing. You're just going to damage your eyes now. And I was like, great. That's my life. Thanks.
You know what? I just realized I was about to mention Tom Segura, and that's how we ended our other one when we talked about an interview. But when he's like, my eyes don't work. He has that other part where he talks about the doctor who tells him that his example, he's like, oh, so like my hair just got old, so it fell out. He's like, yeah, or like my eyes just stopped working. He's like, yeah, exactly. That's what I think.
Yeah, pretty much. Mine's a little different because I'm doing the damage. Like I am hurting my eyes, and so the doctor's just like, nah, it's too late. You're doing it. I think sure actual phrasing was like, I just would have told you not to get involved in that career, and I was like, okay, that's a little personal. Okay, but let's end on Tom Segura there. Thank you, Elliot, for answering the questions. I really appreciate it. Audience, I hope you learned stuff. I will put a little timestamp to help people skip pet talk if they want to skip pet talk. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.